I'm Tenitra Batiste, and this wasn't the end of the era in the way what we were expecting.
I'm Maria Martin, and Bijan Robinson said green light on the uniform, so that's a good thing.
I'm Aaron Freeman, and it seems like we're finally going to get the Falcons drafting a tackle high in the draft.
ATL! ATL!
Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcon Squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcon Squad Show starts now.
To the Falcon Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me, our Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, and 11 Alive anchor, Maria Martin. Locked On analyst, Jarvis Davis, will be back with us next week. The Squad Show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. So, 76 is done. Now what? We'll discuss it. And JPJ was absent. We'll unpack what that means as well. And well, we've got a little information on someone who wants to retire as a Falcon, but will he? So retirement is really at the top and bottom of our show today. We'll talk about all of it. But first, let's tackle that first retirement, that move one day ago that might affect what the Falcons do 2 weeks from now as well. So Kaleb McGary announces that he's calling it a career. Maria, did you see this coming at this point?
No, honestly, I didn't. I mean, even last year in training camp, I remember when we talked to Kaleb McGary, he said he was feeling the best he ever had, and we felt very hopeful because we know Kaleb has had a couple of injuries throughout his career, although he's been one of the more stable and reliable offensive tackles that the Falcons have had in years past. I felt really good about Kaleb going into the year, and then obviously that catastrophic knee injury, I think, probably pushed him over the edge because when you have serious injuries like that, especially when you're an offensive lineman, a position that's so brutal on your body in the NFL, you just kind of have to weigh what's worth it anymore for you. And Kaleb, in the conversations that we had with him, even last year, he was very over the injury aspect of it. And so I thought that whenever that knee injury happened, the latest one, I thought maybe he could have been thinking about an earlier retirement. And by earlier, I didn't think it would mean before his contract was even up, because remember, he signed that monster extension through 2027. So yeah, I was really surprised. I was sitting here in my office cutting my package and I see, okay, Kaleb McGary is retiring on a Wednesday at 1 p.m. Like, I just never saw that coming at this point. And it really stinks for the Falcons. You know, he was the last offensive lineman that they drafted in the first round, and he has been someone that's just been such a staple. And remember, that's going to be such a critical position now that you've got two lefties playing quarterback.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you on that one. I think that sometimes when you have an injury like Kaleb McGary sustained before last season that took him out, you got a whole lot of time to sit and think about whether or not this is what you want to continue to do for going forward. We've seen also a trend in the NFL where players are retiring earlier and earlier because the sport can be really brutal on your body, coupled with the fact that he deals with a heart condition that I am very familiar with, AFib, atrial fibrillation, where there's an arrhythmia. Basically, it's an irregular rapid heartbeat. Now, don't get me wrong. He's undergone successful procedures dating back to even his college days, but it's one of those things that always plays in the back of your head because you know that irregular heartbeat and all of the issues that could come as a result of it. It's still something that you are always thinking about. It's always, I don't want to say top of mind, but it's always on your mind. That said, still, Aaron, I think as we're walking into, and we talked about this earlier this week on the Squad Show Monday, how we're excited because it feels like, hey, we're getting back to some semblance of regular football. So you get back to these voluntary team activities, only to hear one guy's not getting back to the voluntary team activities. And Kaleb McGary, were you shocked at this one coming now?
It's shocking that it happened right now. That's the shock. It's not shocking that Kaleb McGary called it quits early in his NFL career because he, as Maria just outlined, he's never sounded like a person that was trying to pull a Jake Matthews that was going to play till he was 35, right? Agreed. Kaleb McGary was here for a good time, not a long time. And so I think, you know, the expectation for me was this was a possibility next year, more so than a possibility this year. And so I think, as Maria outlined, coming back from that knee injury, the offseason program beginning, and probably realizing, you know what, I'd rather be at home right now.
You'd rather be hunting bears.
Yeah, we all have those days where you wake up and you're just like, I don't want to go to work today. But the difference between Kaleb McGary and most of us is that Kaleb McGary has millions in the bank. So he can make that choice and be just fine, while the rest of us got to go like, oh, here we go. Got to get on a squad show. Here we go. But
was that you this morning? Is that why you're airing your grievances right now?
No. I enjoyed the squad shows. It's the bright spot of my week every single week. But the rest of it. But I just think like with him calling it quits, it was unexpected for it to happen now. But if you had told me that Kaleb McGary was not going to play till he was like 32 or something like that, I would have been like, yeah, sure, that sounds about right based off what he said, because he even said it when he got his first extension, that like he wasn't necessarily planning on playing forever, and it was just like, I'm getting this money so I can build my bunker somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and go off the grid, and that's really what it was all about. Just financing. He was playing football to finance his bunker. That's basically what and to bully defensive ends. That's, those are his two loves in lives. So, it wasn't that shocking, but given the specific timing of right now, yeah, it was a little surprising.
Yeah, and it's giving Mountain Man, by the way, you guys, but hey, listen, I think you guys hit the nail on the head. It's nothing that we didn't think was coming. We never thought he was going to be an NFL lifer, for lack of a better term. It's like, get your money, get paid, and go enjoy your life. You spent a good deal of years in the league. You've got your pension, and you also made a positive impact. I mean, we talked about him being a really good, a solid run blocker, if you will. That skill actually continued to evolve since he got drafted, and he was serviceable in pass blocking. So definitely, it's one of those where, Maria, you might say, hey, you did what you came to do. But speaking of doing what you came to do, I think, noticed that Ian Cunningham is a very like no holds barred, very like, hey, thanks for your service, but we got to move on because we've got voluntary activities. I've got a draft in 2 weeks that I need to craft. And so I need to figure out what I'm going to do from that perspective as it relates to this position. So not long after Kaleb McGary made his announcement, the Falcons, reportedly, per Drew Rosenhaus, Robert Bailey, Jawaan Taylor's agents, he reportedly reached a 1-year deal, and that's with a base value of $5 million, an additional $1 million in incentives. Of course, Jawaan Taylor is the former Chief. He was a free agent. So we know, Maria, what the success level has been for most of that O-line for the Chiefs over the years. What do you think about this particular signing for the Falcons?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, T, when you were talking about Ian Cunningham, no holds barred, thanks for your service, moving on. I think one thing that's really good about specifically this year with Ian Cunningham is he doesn't have any allegiance to any of these players. So while Kaleb McGary was a former first-round draft pick, and he was essentially the final piece of what was a very strong offensive line in the past, a veteran offensive line, he's kind of like, okay, well, Alex Mack isn't here anymore. Now you're not going to be here anymore. Who cares? Moving on. Let's rebuild and make sure that we make the offensive line everything that we want it to be. So I think that is good for Ian Cunningham in that sense. He's not emotionally tied, not that you're ever emotionally tied to much in the NFL, but just you're not tied to anything, and he can just cut the ties and be like, all right, moving on. And he did so very quickly. That's, to me, one of the more surprising, not surprising things. It's just the timing of it all with Kaleb retiring, just a couple weeks away from the draft. You do have to pivot and move very quickly when it comes to an offensive lineman, because now you do have a position that, as I mentioned before, is so critical with two lefty quarterbacks. You got to make sure that you have someone there to know how to play the position. And clearly Jawaan Taylor is a great option. I mean, he was released from the Chiefs because of salary cap concerns. They wanted to save some money. And so now that's going to happen for the Falcons. And for, I think, a lot of reasons, Ian Cunningham and company love the 1-year deal for these veterans. You've seen it a couple different times in free agency so far for the Falcons. This makes sense because all it is right now is you plug Jawaan Taylor in there, you get a veteran in there, and whoever they pick up, meaning I think they should probably draft someone now at this point, you can learn now under Jawaan Taylor, and even Storm Norton, because we've seen Storm Norton be a really solid backup option, but you're now looking towards longevity, and that obviously isn't Jawaan Taylor, but he's going to give you enough to make sure that the offensive line is solid this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he's a nice plug and play piece that Ian Cunningham was able to pick up. But for you, Aaron, does the move make sense as well?
Yeah, I think it does. When you look at the options available at this point in time, when you look at a Jawaan Taylor, you look at a Jonah Williams, Jack Conklin, who played for Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland. The knock on Williams and Conklin are they have been injured a bunch over the last couple of years, and you don't necessarily know if you can trust those guys to play 17 games. And that really hasn't been an issue with Jawaan Taylor, although he did deal with some injuries last year. And I think his floor is probably a little higher just because of the durability. He's kind of the opposite of Kaleb McGary, where we talk about Kaleb McGary being a plus run blocker, but maybe a little questionable in pass protection. Taylor's kind of the opposite, where the run blocking is not great, but the pass protection is generally good. The big knock on Jawaan Taylor, as far as pass protection goes, is the penalties, right? That if you watched Elijah Wilkinson's false starts last year and you're like, I don't know about this. You ain't seen nothing yet with Jawaan Taylor and his tendency to false start. He's cleaned that up a little bit, but there's still a lot of holdings, there's a lot of illegal formations and whatnot. So that's the one big issue with Jawaan Taylor, where if you know anything about Jawaan Taylor, it's his tendency to get penalized a bunch. I do think there are ways that the Falcons can, scheme things up and adjust their scheme, moving away from, that very pass heavy attack that the Chiefs had that often left him on an island. With their 5-man pass protections. I don't see the Falcons majoring in that to the degree that the Chiefs did. So I do think those are some of the things that can help mitigate some of the penalty issues with Jawaan Taylor so that they won't be as egregious an issue here in Atlanta as they were in Kansas City. But I do think overall, in terms of that plug and play, sort of get you somebody that you feel comfortable with starting this season at right tackle, similar to a lot of the other moves that the Falcons have made this offseason, where it's just get somebody in here that can raise the floor, and then we'll figure it out later in the draft. I think Jawaan Taylor makes the most sense for the Falcons, and I feel like this fits really well with the other moves that the Falcons have made this offseason.
Yeah, and you make another great point as well, Aaron, when you think about the fact that we're at a point in this off season, that kind of lull period between the start of free agency and the draft, you do have some of those more quality O-linemen having been picked up already. So when you look at I'm going to say the term loosely, slim pickings at this point, it's like, hey, to still be able to get a solid veteran like a Jawaan Taylor this deep into free agency, but yet this close to the draft, I think you couldn't have asked Ian Cunningham for a much better replacement than Kaleb McGary. But also, Maria, like you said, just having someone like a Storm Norton who could be serviceable to the team, I think that bodes well too, so that when you look at what the front office has to consider overall, they at least have choices, they have options, they have pieces. But you also have to think about whether or not McGary's departure changes the Falcons draft strategy. We'll take that under further review. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by FanDuel. So think about this. The NBA playoffs are here. It seems like we just started the season yesterday, but lo and behold, a couple games left and we're in the postseason. And it's where every possession matters, every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. And here's what you're going to like about it. You can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. And during the playoffs, that extra insight really matters when you're looking at the stars, when you're looking at the role players, or even when you're looking at the moments that matter. And it just makes the entire playoff experience more engaging from start to finish. You can check out the FanDuel's website at FanDuel.com to get started. You can look up current lines and you can look up odds as well. So again, all you have to do is bet your $5, and for that $5, you can get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And of course, the app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. and their extra insight, it's going to really matter when you're looking at the stars, who's available, who's not available, some of the role players who step up, and the key moments in each series. So don't forget, you can check it out on the app, or you can head over to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you for making the Falcon Squad Show your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So again, got the news that Kaleb McGary is retiring, moving on from his career with the NFL. Also got the news that Jawaan Taylor has been signed to a 1-year deal. Pretty friendly deal for the Falcons, if you will. But we know what's looming, Aaron. We have a draft that is a little over 2 weeks away, because of course, the Falcons don't have a first round pick. So for the Falcons, the draft really begins 2 Fridays from tomorrow. But that said, how, if at all, do you feel that the retirement of McGary, but also the signing of Taylor, changes Ian Cunningham's approach to the draft?
Well, I'm not convinced it changes that much, because as we discussed earlier with Kaleb McGary, I was kind of going into this draft thinking like, oh, this is going to be Kaleb McGary's last year in Atlanta. And so it would be smart for the Falcons to kind of secure their long-term right tackle, especially as Maria pointed out, because there's going to be so much more emphasis on that position moving forward. If the Falcons continue to roll with left-handed quarterbacks. I know we spent a lot of time last summer talking about, is the blind side that big a deal? But, the general perception is always like, oh, well, you got to protect the blind side. And so that position gets magnified in the eyes of fans and media, even if it's not that big a deal to the team.
I'm pretty sure it was Kaleb McGary, by the way, who started that conversation. He was like, it's not really a blind side.
Yeah, it's like, I still got to block my guy, regardless of which hand the quarterback throws with.
Exactly.
So I do feel like the Falcons were kind of already on the path of needing to take a tackle. I just feel like now it's like, oh, you can't pretend anymore that this is a situation. I think you could have sat there with like a ostrich with its head in the sand, thinking like, oh, the Falcons' offensive line is going to be solid for the next 2 or 3 years. And Kaleb McGary is going to be fine. And now you can't convince yourself of that lie or that myth or whatever you want to call it. So I feel like the Falcons were already on a path where they kind of needed to address the right tackle. And now that you have Jawaan Taylor on a 1-year deal, it's kind of the same situation. Now, of course, Jawaan Taylor could go out there and play really well, and you'll be like, oh, well, we didn't necessarily need that guy because we're going to give Jawaan Taylor a long-term extension. But I do think certainly when you look at the room right now in the offensive tackle, Jake Matthews is up there in age. Jawaan Taylor, he's younger, 28. But not necessarily you're convinced he's a long-term option. Storm Norton's on the wrong side of 30. Jack Nelson, Mike Jarrell. What do you trust these guys to play significant roles? So at the very least, you think the Falcons should go into the draft thinking, and without a first-round pick, it's going to be harder to land a future starter, but you can get maybe more of a developmental guy, but a guy that can come in and potentially push for that swing tackle spot behind Jake Matthews and Jawaan Taylor this year, and hopefully be a guy that you might be able to pencil in to be a starter at, potentially right tackle. We're hoping Jake Matthews is not going to suddenly surprise us with a retirement anytime soon. It doesn't seem like Jake is headed. Like Jake feels like he is a football lifer. He's like, I'm going to play probably 2 or 3 more years, try to break my dad's consecutive start record, which I believe he's 34 games away from tying it, if I'm not mistaken. So I think we can feel like Jake is going to be a Falcon for a couple more years, but this news with Kaleb McGary means that nothing is guaranteed at this point in time. So I think it totally makes sense for the Falcons to draft a tackle. And I feel like that was true before Kaleb McGary's retirement. It remains true after Kaleb McGary's retirement. But I just feel like now it's very clear to everybody else that this is going to be an issue, even if it wasn't before.
Yeah, and we talked about this Monday, Maria, so I wanted to kind of bring you up to speed and also just give you an opportunity as well, Aaron, to kind of follow up on it. So on Monday squad shows, we'll be kind of doing mock drafts throughout the course of the weeks leading up to the draft. So we went through the second round and the third round on Monday. And interestingly enough, again, this is Monday. This is before we get the Kaleb McGary information, right? So we all kind of went with the defensive side of the ball, if you will. We went with D tackles, we went with nose tackles, we went with corners, and I think we went with wide receivers as well. And because our thought was, well, we'll hold off on the offensive lineman if we can help it to the fourth round. So I think my second question there would be to you, Maria, and to you, Aaron, looking back on what we talked about Monday, does that specifically change Ian Cunningham's approach to the draft just in terms of the second and third round picks? Or do you feel like he could potentially find someone viable in that fourth round?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always going to be offensive line talent in the second and third round. And as Aaron had mentioned before, these are going to be more developmental guys, which is the purpose of Jawaan Taylor in the first place. It's why that completely makes sense for so many different reasons. But I think that there is a lot of really good talent in this draft class specifically, that if you were to draft an offensive tackle, just a swing tackle, it doesn't matter, in the second or third round, I think that you would actually be fine there because again, like this is a offensive line that's had a lot of stability over the last 6 years. And now you're having pieces slowly leave. It started with Alex Mack, then it's Kaleb McGary. I am with Aaron. I don't think that Jake Matthews is close. I will be very surprised if he turns around tomorrow at 1 p.m. and says, hey, me too. The guy never misses a football game. You remember the very famous video and picture of him running in his slides to make it to the game after his firstborn was born.
Yes.
So, yeah, I don't think Jake is going anywhere, but to have a developmental guy is not a bad thing. And, you know, you've heard Ian Cunningham and others in the front office within the last few weeks say that they're going to do whatever it takes to acquire draft capital, whatever that means, and however that approach gets there, which also indicates to me that an offensive tackle, swing tackle, whatever, will actually work out in the second or third round. So I'm with it. And I do think that probably was not the plan if you think that Kaleb McGary was going to be there available for training camp in the season and so forth. So I think that this probably does adjust your plan a little bit, but lucky for them, they've still got a few weeks to keep adjusting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I feel like tackle was always on my radar in round 2. It's just my expectation because, you know, when we were doing the mock on Monday, it was kind of like, okay, well, let's try to be realistic or whatever in terms of what's going to happen in the first 47 picks. Sure. And I feel like there's going to be kind of a run on tackles early in this draft to the point that the guys that you're going to be looking there in round 2, you know, we talked to, I can't remember which squad we talked about, but we talked about the Arizona State offensive tackle, Max Ihanachor, in one of those episodes. And it's like, he would be a great pickup for the Falcons, but I think he's going to be long gone by the time the Falcons are on the board. And then at that point, as Maria just pointed out, like, you're really kind of looking at developmental guys. And then at that point, you're kind of like, well, some of these guys can wait, you know, like this guy's not going to be a plug and play sort of guy. So we can maybe wait to the third or fourth round and be able to find somebody that has the traits, but may take a year or two to get him up to speed and all that stuff. And so I do feel like, you know, now the situation is like, yeah, you probably would feel not great if you go through the first 4 rounds and don't get a tackle.
Yeah.
Just because typically when you look around the NFL, the premium on tackle is such that like usually there's a significant drop off in talent after like the third or fourth round. And you're really just drafting guys, you know, no offense to Jack Nelson, but you're really drafting guys that are projecting to be career backups than guys that are necessarily going to be players that you think can start for you in the future. And so I do feel like this now makes it so that, yeah, you don't want to be in the 5th round or the 6th round because the Falcons don't have a 5th round pick. But like, you don't want to be in the 6th round being like, well, all right, let's take another tackle, and you're just taking basically Jack Nelson 2.0, and that's not, you know, every little thing helps, but like that's not really moving the needle for your football team. So I do feel like now it's going to be, you know, when everybody's doing their mock drafts, they'll probably wind up taking a tackle at some point in the first 4 rounds. Some of these other positions, like, well, that's a deeper position in the draft, so maybe we can wait on a linebacker, you know, maybe we can wait on a tight end or something like that, or another position, you know, later in the draft and prioritize a tackle maybe in that 3rd or 4th round. So I do think that is kind of the bigger adjustment that the Falcons draft strategy will make.
Yeah, draft positioning is probably the biggest challenge for these guys this year. And we
yeah.
always knew it would be, especially when you give away a first round pick with someone who isn't even in the building right now and may never be in the future. We don't know. So I think that, we always believed that when that happened, the thought process by Terry was, I'm gonna swing and swing big, and if it makes it over the fence in the outfield, then great, and we're all keeping our jobs and awesome. But if not, then that's somebody else's problem. And now it is somebody else's problem. And so these are guys that I think are at least optimistic about the fact that they are really set up in a terrible place when it comes to draft numbers. So, and positioning, of course, but I'm interested to see how they rework that, because they keep talking about the fact that they're going to accumulate draft picks. We just don't know what that means.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with you, because when you look at that 48th pick, it's still kind of middling, right? Mm-hmm. And so the guys that they want, you mentioned one of them, which we talked about, Max Onachor before, Caleb Lomu has been kind of thrown out there as well, but that's one of those where he miraculously drops to the middle of the second round, or one where Onachor miraculously is still there as well. And then you kind of go to the third round and there's a bit of a drop off in terms of, just as you mentioned it, Free, the quality you might get out of like a Tiernan over at Northwestern. I mean, just because he played in the Big Ten, it probably helps that, with just the experience that he has and playing with some of the top talent in the country. But again, will he be there? Won't he be there? Or is he going to be viable, being that he is somebody who could potentially not be there for you as well? So it'll be interesting to kind of see how this one plays out, or if we kind of read any tea leaves. And yeah, I think even us, probably Monday, we'll be revisiting the second and third round of our mock draft from this past Monday, because it indeed might make a difference on what we felt like just a few days ago before we knew about Kaleb McGary's decision to retire. Now, Kyle Pitts, on the other hand, signed his $15 million franchise tag this week, making him the highest paid tight end in football for this coming season. Now, the Falcons, they still have until July 15th to negotiate a multi-year extension with KP. But for you, Aaron, does the signing of the franchise tag give you any indication that maybe the Falcons get a long-term deal done before the 15th?
Not particularly. I've been assuming that Kyle Pitts is going to play on the franchise tag this year. Mm-hmm. I feel like, not to try to read too much into it, but I feel like Kyle Pitts is doing what he's supposed to do. Sign the franchise tag, show up for work on the first day of work, and, go about doing what you can do. You can only control what you can control, as they say. And he can't necessarily control how willing the Atlanta Falcons are to extend him on a long-term deal. But he can control, how he approaches it. He shows up to work, and basically it is in his best interest to put his best foot forward this season, whether that leads to the Falcons extending him, between now and July 15th, whether that leads to the Falcons extending him after the season, when he hits free agency, before he hits free agency again next year, or whether that leads to him, signing a deal with another team, and sort of, after the season, or, potentially with a midseason trade if that goes down that way. So, everything that Kyle Pitts can control, I think, is, about like, let me do my best, because someone's going to pay me. It's just a question of who, but in the next 11 months or something like that. And so that to me is kind of more what this move is signaling, of him sort of building off of what he did last year, where we spent so much time last offseason talking about, is he being used correctly, as well as, is he living up to his end of the billing and being as consistent as he wants to be. And we got the most consistent version of Kyle Pitts. There were, still some ups and downs, as there often is in the NFL. But it was the most consistent version of Kyle Pitts that we've seen in his 5-year career. And I think he's looking to build off of that. And so that's, to me, what this signing is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way as Aaron, and I still get this feeling that we are not going to see Kyle Pitts in a Falcons uniform next year. All of these things are just steps in the right direction for both parties, as Aaron had mentioned, and it's buying you some time on making a true, genuine decision on KP's future here. They've mentioned it many times. The new front office is taking this time, minus Matt Ryan, because he knows what KP brings to the table. They're taking this time to really evaluate him and figure out if he is a part of their long-term plan, and giving him an opportunity to sign his franchise tender, I think is the right thing to do in this scenario. And that doesn't obviously mean that he's going to be in a Falcons uniform next year. As you mentioned, July 15th, the deadline to make something bigger happen. But even once he signs the tender, which assuming he already has at this point in time, then he can be shipped off anywhere. And I think that it is possible. I think it's very possible that Kyle doesn't play for the Falcons next year. I think, just as Aaron put it, Kyle's just kind of doing what he's supposed to do. And he should have no worries, because regardless of what happens between now and July or now and January, whatever, Kyle's going to get paid somewhere. He's going to be playing somewhere. He's going to be a very highly sought after tight end. I still don't believe that it's going to be here, but who knows? Maybe this front office has other plans.
Yeah, I would agree with you as well. I think that this is all the posturing that the Falcons need to do. I think you said it best, Maria, as well, but it still puts Kyle Pitts in a great position for his future. But I don't believe that future is going to be with the Falcons either beyond the next season. JPJ, on the other hand, we're not really sure what his future is with the Falcons, but we do know, at least for this week, it wasn't in Flowery Branch. We'll unpack what that means next. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by TurboTax. It's tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes as well, a lot. Trying to book an appointment that's not the most convenient, sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth, and wondering if they really get your situation. But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve, while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. So head to turbotax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment. So Maria, James Pearce Jr. informed the Falcons that he would not be present for voluntary workouts this week. Does this decision make sense for both parties involved, all things considered, as it relates to, of course, his ongoing legal challenges that he's facing? I'll just leave it right there.
Yeah. I mean, I do. This is the best option for everybody right now, just because they're continuing the legal process. And when you have an ongoing legal investigation, you've got to really, really tread on thin ice here. Yeah. And I think that probably his representation was very adamant about that. I'm sure the Falcons were as well. They at least left the door open. Hey, if you want to come here, you want to work out, I don't know if they did that, but it's possible. It sounds kind of like that. We now know, we kind of already knew this when Kevin had his first press conference. The man's not going to tell you anything ever. Okay. He didn't even want to tell you who was in the building, which I don't understand. I mean, to me, it's a voluntary deal. And yes, he made that clear. We're all very aware. You don't have to be there. I don't think it gives you an extra sticker on your helmet if you show up. I don't think that you get a slap on the wrist if you don't. And so I don't think it's as big of a deal. So I didn't understand the caution tape and the sealed envelope around presence and absence. But for JPJ, I think it is probably the smartest move for everybody involved to not have him in the building right now, and specifically because it's voluntary. And they have no idea whether or not he's going to be a part of this organization moving forward until that legal stuff wraps up. So, I'm sure he's working out at a gym wherever he's at in the world right now. And that's pretty much all you can ask of him at this point. I would have been completely shocked if he was in that building come yesterday.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, as you mentioned, we're not shocked that he wasn't there. But I think that there were some things that were said by many of his teammates where you can see that there's still a love, a compassion for his situation and a show of support. And hey, if he does return, we'll be right there with him 100%. But as of now, that's still so up in the air, especially because when we think about where we were, Aaron, just a couple of months ago when all of this news broke, I mean, it seemed pretty damning. I don't think at that point, at least, any of us thought he'd have a job in the NFL, let alone with his current team, if you will, and let alone this upcoming season. But now that we've progressed a little bit more, it seems like there's at least a possibility that happens. But for now, that possibility is still up in the air because this battle is ongoing. So I would imagine you as well were not necessarily surprised that he was absent this week.
Yeah, we hear this all the time with NFL teams. Distractions, right?
Exactly.
And James Pearce being in the building would be a distraction.
Because the questions were still there and he wasn't in the building.
Yeah, people like Maria Martin would be asking questions all about, James Pearce and what is he doing? What is he eating? And what all these various things. That's what
I don't know if I would have done that.
Yeah, I know.
You would have been the bold one to ask the question. We love it. We love the boldness.
But I just think like for everybody, it's just like, yeah, this is a distraction. It's voluntary.
Who cares?
Go work out on your own, and we'll hold down the fort here in Flowery Branch. You'll be fine. So I think that's kind of the message, and it's not, as you said, T. It's not a surprise that was the sort of conclusion, and so they'll just kind of punt this decision because there's some legal things that have to happen in the next month or so. And then we'll get to mandatory minicamp in June, and then we'll sort of reassess to sort of see what's going on and what the latest situation is with James Pearce at that point in time, where we'll hopefully have a little bit more legal clarity about his future, not just, in Atlanta, but in terms of like, life at this point in time. So there's some things that I think have to get played out over these next couple of weeks. And so I think it's best for both parties to just kind of like, you know what? Just do your own thing, and we'll figure this out later.
Yeah, because there's still the larger party, meaning the NFL front office, that has to make a decision on what they will do, what infractions may come as a result of the investigation, their own internal investigation, regardless of what happens from a legal perspective, regardless law enforcement and the like in Florida. So yeah, I think that if you want to just avoid anything, and listen, Maria, Aaron, we know that the Falcons have had enough of those distractions, if you will. Every time it seems like they've turned the page to move on and you should be optimistic and looking forward to just football. Yeah. Then there's some controversy like this that just takes the energy out of the room or sucks the air out of the room. And I know the Falcons just want to keep the focus. Kevin Stefanski, new head coach, Ian Cunningham, new GM. We're building a solid roster in the offseason, and we're going to keep building it in the draft. Matt Ryan, president of football, like they want that to be the focus. And so they don't want, I'm going to use Aaron's word, distractions. And they really just want that energy to reset itself for this new regime. And who can blame them for that, right? Because we know what we've seen, especially not necessarily from a criminal perspective or anything this salacious, but we know what we saw at the back half of the end of the last regime. And I know that they're like, yeah, we just want to move on and talk about the positives of what's coming in 2026. Now, speaking to that, Bijan Robinson stated that he's trying to be better this year than he was last year. And I say it that way because it's like, oh my God, like Bijan had a monster year. He just keeps getting better and better. So you know that there's every possibility for him to get better. But man, just looking at his stats from the run game alone with 287 carries, almost 1,500 yards, 7 touchdowns, probably want to get into the double digits there. But when you think about this, how do you see Kevin Stefanski's system allowing him to do that? Maybe even pass catcher side too.
Who are you asking, T?
Oh, Aaron, Maria. It doesn't
Go for it, Aaron.
Go for it, Aaron. I mean, you seem like you were going to jump on in there. So
yeah, you looked like you were ready.
Right.
The thing with Bijan is always like, we're always sitting here going like, can you do this slightly better? Like last year it was like, we've seen you bust off those 20, 30-yard runs, Bijan, but can you turn it into 60 or something like that? Like, and so he was able to do that. And then this year, and as Bijan outlined when he was talking, he was like, he had a couple fumbles, some costly fumbles last year, which we saw in his rookie year. And then he was able to eliminate in his second year. And then they kind of came back and it's like, okay, let's cut down on those fumbles, Bijan, especially in the third quarter, because they always seem to happen in the third quarter last year. It was part of the whole Falcons' terrible third quarters. But it's those are the little things that Bijan can always sort of clean up. And it's, as you mentioned, T, like the route running and the pass catching, it's like he's one of the best in the league. Yeah. But there's little incremental growths that he can make that can improve his game to get him better. So it's like, yes, Bijan can get better, but it's like we're not talking about a player that's like it's going to be night and day. It's just like small tweaks. It's like 4 plays better, like, and that being a 20-yard run, now it's a 60-yard run. That being a fumble is not a fumble, and now it's a 15-yard gain. That being, a 15-yard pass catch or whatever, and now it's a 30-yard pass catch. So it's like he's just got to tweak those slight things, and then it's like, okay, yeah, he's walking on water, but maybe he can moonwalk on water. That's basically the difference.
I love it. I love it.
Moonwalk on water.
Let's ask him if he can right? I'm like, and I had a visual of that, by the way. But yeah, you're right. It's little things like that. Or if he's able to not fumble the ball, if you will, maybe that's 10 or 12 touchdowns last year instead of 7, at least on the ground, if you will. But when you look at his receiving numbers, those have improved as well, where he had 79 catches on 103 targets, 820 yards, 4 touchdowns. So yeah, Maria, but he did have that one fumble that he lost. But that, we're just nitpicking at this point, saying, okay, now time to moonwalk on water. But how do you see 7 getting better in Stefanski's offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron kind of laid it out. This is not a player who it's going to be night and day different for Bijan. And I think if he would stand up there and be like, no, I want to do the same thing I did last year, we might be like, okay, but it'd be a really weird thing to say, and Bijan always has really high goals. He's always had that ever since he's gotten into the league. And I've told you guys this for really the past year. I had noticed this shift in Bijan and that he felt more confident, was exuding this confidence, like he was figuring it out. And yesterday he actually illustrated all of what I've been telling you guys for the last really year. The game has slowed down for Bijan, which is terrifying for the rest of the league. There were so many times where earlier in Bijan's career, which we're only entering year 4, but in the first or second year, where he would just do silly little things that didn't make sense. And you knew that if he would tweak just these minor things, because he's so gifted on his own, he really doesn't even have to try. It's a lot of what we say about Pearce Jr. He just has this natural gift and ability that really technique and everything, if it's not 100%, it doesn't matter for those 2 players, Bijan being at the forefront of that. And so now that the game is slowed down and he only has to do incremental tweaks here and there, I mean, the sky's the limit for this kid. I think he's a future Hall of Famer. He's an unbelievable talent. And I remember when the Falcons had drafted him as high as they did, and the critical piece of that for people who didn't know anything about Bijan Robinson was, why in the world would you draft a running back that high? And that was the overarching theme and conversation. That when you realize who Bijan is, and he's a once-in-a-generational talent. I think coaches like Kevin Stefanski, Tommy Reese, I mean, whoever's going to get their hands on him, Petrie, of course, we know, thinks the world of Bijan. They're just ecstatic just to even be able to have a player like this on their roster. And the very unique thing about Bijan is we don't have to talk about him being this one-dimensional running back. He does so many different things. He's a pass catcher, as you mentioned. And so I was just so thrilled to see him break off that long run last year, because I remember that was the big goal in training camp. He's like, oh, I can't have the long runs. And then we were like, wait, Bijan, oh my God, look at him go. So yeah, I think there's going to be more moments like that for him. He'll never share the goals that I think he personally has. He's gotten like more secretive. This is what happens when you're in the NFL. You get bigger, you're more famous. I had to on the side ask him, like, tell me what you wouldn't tell me in the press conference. But no, he's set for another monster year. And I think it's only going to keep getting better. I don't think last year was a one-off. I think you will continue to see him get better as the years go on.
Yeah. And I was thinking too about, this is what Aaron said about the fumbles in the third quarter. And I'm thinking, all right, Michael Petrie, time for you to do a different speech at halftime, because apparently whatever speech you were given or the halftime adjustments ain't it for 7. So
one working.
Yeah, one working.
They got to change the Gatorade flavor at halftime. It's something
or that part. Yes,
yeah.
Some subtle thing that will help him to be the Bijan that you saw in the first half, to be that Bijan in the third quarter for the sustainability across the season. But also, and this is a little sidebar, but a funny sidebar, Marie, I think in your cold open, you were saying that Bijan gave an approval, his seal of approval for the uniforms.
He did. Yeah. Yeah. I asked him. I was the one that asked him that stupid question, but I think it's important because, for Bijan specifically, and why I didn't ask other people if they like it, his number was the biggest difference. Him and Jalen Walker, but we didn't get a chance to talk to him the other day. So Bijan's number goes from a 1 to a 7 just visually. So I wanted to know what it looked like for him. And he said, he does read the comments just in case you guys are curious, because he admitted that. He said, I saw what people are saying online and a lot of it was negative and now people are down with it. He thinks it's clean, obviously. It's funny. He kind of deflected a little bit and didn't really say what he thought. He just said what everyone else thought. But yeah, I know he's super stoked to see that 7 instead of a 1.
And I was chuckling about it too. I was curious to see what he said because, it's been a week now, a little over a week, and people are still up in arms saying that the uniforms are mid, and they're up in arms about the gray and where the gray should and should not be. So yeah, I was just curious to see, like you said, you asked him the question and kind of what your take on his take was.
Something changed though. I think now that they've been able to sit with it. And by the way, for those of you, and I'm not trying to attack anybody, but for those of you that want the silver pants, go ahead and AI that in your phone. It looks terrible, bad, garbage. Don't remove that from your brain because it looks really bad. In your head, it probably looks good. But
yeah,
I saw someone tweet a picture of it and I was like, this is what you guys like?
Yeah.
Oh no.
This is what they're up in arms over. Over a week later, people are still commenting on it.
And there's silver on the pants anyway. It's in the stripe. It doesn't need to be the whole pant. This isn't the Cowboys, even though I know it's not silver. Okay, whatever.
Right. But then the comment was, well, that's not enough because ATL, we do it big. And so that little silver stripe down the side, that's not getting it done.
Why don't we leave the doing it big to the football? Okay.
Yeah, giving way too much energy to a uniform.
Let's do it big on the field.
Right.
I think there's never, I said this the last time we talked about the uniforms, and not to go off on a tangent on you, team, but to me, there is nothing better than showing up on a football field with clean, simple uniforms and just beating the expletive out of somebody. I just think that's so powerful. You don't need to glow in the dark, which is what I said last week. Just as long as you play good football, it's all good. But no, it's funny. One of our producers at my station hated the uniforms. Okay, I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but absolutely hated them when they dropped. It was going off on them, and he was just very passionate about how much he didn't like them. I was like, all right, relax. And then a couple days later, he comes in, he's like, I think I like them now. I'm like, what changed? You hated them so much. I think it's just the idea of wanting something cool, maybe a feather attached to this.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what people were looking for, but yeah, it stayed a part of the conversation, and I'm like,
it's crazy.
Yeah, we just really need to move on. Well, speaking of moving on, we know that Kaleb McGary has moved on. Jessie Bates III, however, says he pretty much is cool if he doesn't move on. But what did the Falcons feel about that? What did Aaron and Maria feel about it? We'll talk about that when we come back. It's funny because I was going to say we'll talk about that next up, because one of my producers hates when anyone says when we come back, because he's like, well, where are you going? So my mind went to that real quick.
On a commercial break.
Right. But anywho, like we'd said before, Kaleb McGary no longer a Falcon because he's no longer an NFL player. He has retired. But when Jessie Bates III was asked about wanting to retire, particularly as a Falcon, he told our colleague here on the Squad Shows and senior Falcons reporter Tori McElhaney, yeah, absolutely. Quote, I want to retire as a Falcon. I have a beautiful house here, a beautiful family. My family loves it here. Why would I not want to be a Falcon? And he said the Falcons have not necessarily discussed a potential extension with him. He says, quote, I think every year is a 1-year contract. Things can change. People can get traded and get cut. But whether I had 2 years left or I had 1, I would come here and work likely if I only had 1. All of that considered, Aaron, you see Jessie Bates finishing his career as a Falcon?
It's possible. I'm rooting for it. I'm rooting for that outcome. But so much of this season for the Falcons is just we're trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah.
And you have Jessie Bates going into a contract year. You have basically like 30 guys right now that are kind of slated to be free agents next year. And so like not all 30 of those guys are coming back in 2027. And we already talked about Kyle Pitts, and we talked about Jawaan Taylor and Kaleb McGary and all those other guys. It's like the only players that you could sit there and say like, oh, they're definitely going to be Falcons in 2027 is like AJ Terrell, Bijan Robinson, Jake Matthews, and a handful of others. And so I think a lot on Jessie Bates' future will depend on this season. If the Falcons feel like, okay, well, let's keep the band together, I think they'll be very open to, extending Jessie Bates, potentially, guaranteeing him through, like, say, the 2028 season, which would be year 3 for this current regime, and would be basically, we're going to make sure that Jessie Bates is with us at least for the foreseeable future, that we can sit here and say, we're going to be here, presumably for 3 years or more. And so I think a lot will depend on how Bates performs, how the team performs. But, I certainly think Jessie Bates still has a lot of good football left in him. I know much was made about like a decline last year. I feel like that was overblown just because he wasn't getting interceptions. But I think he still was an impactful player, even if he wasn't getting those game-changing plays. And he still got a couple. He still got a couple as he does. And so, I feel like it's definitely a possibility. But with a lot of these players, especially the guys on 1-year deals, it's kind of a toss-up on whether or not they're going to be back, because so much depends on where this team feels like they're at the end of the season. Like if they, no one's rooting for this, but like if they win like 6 games this year, that feels like a team that's, several years away. And so that may be a team that's more willing to move on from Jessie Bates. But if, they can win 9 or more games and make the playoffs, then I think that's certainly a world where the Falcons are be like, yeah, let's keep this thing going. So it just a lot just kind of is up in the air, I think, and a lot depends on what happens this season.
Yeah, and for you, Maria, do you see that possibility? Like, is it a stronger possibility that you see Jessie Bates being here as a Falcon for life, so to speak?
I mean, the biggest concern with Jessie is always going to be the money in the future, right? And for Jessie, I was a little surprised he said that. Not that I don't think that he loves Atlanta and wants to be here or whatever, but to hear it coming from a player who really hasn't been here all that long, I thought was very interesting. And not to mention, hasn't been here that long. He's been slapped around by the changing of the guard pretty much every year. I mean, he mentioned it in his first 3 seasons here. He was having to completely change over defenses and defensive philosophies and install and all that. And so I think it was just a little surprising to me, but it makes sense. I mean, we all love Atlanta. We want to be in Atlanta for a really long time. So I'm with it. I totally understand. But the reality of Jessie Bates being a Falcon for life probably is not high. But if it works out, then great. I would love to manifest that for Jessie because he was fired up about it. But, I don't necessarily think he would be one of the first people I would think about inputting in that category. And I agree with Aaron. I thought that last year, the drop-off, so to speak, with Jessie, because he was slightly less productive than he was last year, I thought it was completely overblown. I mean, he's fine. He's going to be fine. He even, I don't know if anyone watched the press conference with him when he did. And at the very end of him saying, last year, the sack record, maybe we get the interception record. And he gave this smile like he knows something that we don't know. And I was like, interesting. So, he clearly feels very good going into the season. I'm still pretty surprised he said that. I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah. And maybe it's more about the family life than anything, and kind of, maybe just his family buying a home here. They enjoy their lives here. I mean, it's Atlanta. What's not to like about living here?
I mean, he came, no offense to people from Ohio, but he came from Ohio and,
Like, come on.
Cincinnati, yeah. No offense to Cincinnati. Great town, but like,
I'm sure it's awesome. But like, if you're thinking about, other lifestyle aspects,
Skyline chili, lemon pepper wings. What are you going to choose?
What are we doing here? Right. Yeah. This is not a debate. One more thing I wanted to ask, because Aaron, you kind of threw it out there, and it is something of a narrative that I've been hearing a little bit more. So I was curious to know what you guys thought as well. And that's kind of the narrative of kind of figuring it out this 2026 season, because I've heard some other media members say that. And it's like, okay, well, so are we sort of in a rebuilding, wait and see how this plays out in 2026 versus a resurgence? I mean, what do you think the franchise is closest to, assuming that they have good picks in the draft, assuming that everyone who's on board right now is healthy and they go into the season as currently constructed, closer to rebuild, reset, or closer to resurgence?
I think a lot depends on the quarterback situation. I really think that's at the top of the list. It's like, if you feel like, whether it's Tua, whether it's Michael Penix, and I imagine most of us think the correct answer is Michael Penix, but if you think they have a quarterback that they can win games with, then, I think they're a lot closer. But if we get through the end of this season and it's like still, 7, 10, 8, 9 middling quarterback play, which has been the through line over the last, 5 years here in Atlanta with the constant revolving door, then it's like, well, we still got to figure out this quarterback situation, and we're not really going anywhere until we figure that situation out. So it's not a rebuild in that sense where it's like you're going to tear it all completely down. But until you figure out the quarterback situation, like, this team is not really going anywhere. They're just kind of spinning their wheels in the middle of the pack. And, I know everybody watching us and listening to us right now, as well as all three of us, and we'll speak for Jarvis here, is just kind of tired of that. And so to me, like, you got to figure out the quarterback situation. So to me, ultimately, where this team is at really is tied to that position.
It's the same conversation that we've had since the president of football left for greener pastures, as in Indianapolis. And not that it was his choice, but you know what I mean. I'm just laughing at Indianapolis being green. But, I do think that the conversation will never stop until you get a quarterback that is going to be here for the next 10 years. And it's going to set the tone for your franchise. It does for every other team in the NFL. All 31 other teams in the NFL are having the same conversation, unless they have a quarterback who is their stable quarterback and is going to be there for a while. And it has been this revolving door of ridiculous situations at the position for the Falcons, which continues to set them back a step further and a step further and a step further. You can build up the defense, you can build up the pieces on offense all around the quarterback all you want. Yeah. But until you get that position right, you're going to be having the same conversation and over, and we're going to be like one toe in the water of the playoffs and the outside looking in and looking through the glass and watching the Carolina Panthers go to the playoffs over yourself. So until that is actually figured out, and even if Tua plays, Tua balls out, all that stuff is great, amazing, you still have a 1-year deal. You have a 1-year deal of a quarterback. So you're still in the same position. So until these guys figure that out, Matt Ryan probably knows that as good as anybody else, because he did it really well here in this city for a very long time. We're going to be having the same conversation.
Yeah, that's true, because it kind of feels like the old adage, not maybe as dramatic per se, but it does kind of feel like the old adage of, well, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And right now, you kind of don't have any quarterbacks, because right now it's just a question mark. So, yeah, I think you guys are right. It's somewhere maybe in the middle of a reset for the franchise versus in the middle of a reset and a resurgence, if you will, because it's just a TBD. We don't know until we know who's going to take that field week 1 and kind of how things play out, maybe even in that first quarter of the season relative to who takes the field. That might dictate whether this season turns out to be the reset or the resurgence. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcon Squad Show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen. The Falcon Squad Show and Locked On Falcons are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We will see you next time.